All right, okay, good evening, everyone. So, great, let's just do a quick check, make sure everything is working fine. Right, okay, good. So let's get started for today's session, right? So, as usual, I'll run through the markets over here, keep you guys updated, of course. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat. We'll be able to keep an eye on it and, of course, answer questions accordingly. Right. I think let's start off by kind of talking a little bit about what are some of the key things to note over the weekend. Obviously, if you've been kind of like monitoring the markets, I would say late Friday, going into the weekend, it started off with Trump putting up a post, right? And of course, we did see the equities market started to sell off a little bit. Some of the currency pairs, of course, are also experiencing some volatility. And then that's where, the market closed. And then you go over the weekend. And of course, the crypto market then continues to see that major sell off, right? And then, of course, Bitcoin here has dropped quite significantly. I measure it roughly around, if I just very, very quickly go to the chart, right? You can see this dip here. It's somewhat about 14%. 16%, right, to be exact. And then, of course, we did get the market then reject all the way back up, recover back about half of it. Okay. And of course, this particular move has shake the market a little bit in the crypto scene as well. We do see, tweets coming in about how pounds were being wiped out because of this particular move. And of course, that's really because of leverage position, right? When such volatility increase, oftentimes, even if you have a potential stop, you may not get out at the actual price that you put your stop, right? Because of that fear and that sell off where liquidity is low, and you might get out at a slightly worse position, right? But that's really a important learning point, and hopefully none of you are caught in that move. If you sold it, obviously that's fantastic, right? But again, that's the importance of risk management and not kind of over leverage in any of the particular position, right? My personal take is always whenever we look into the crypto markets and if we're gonna take crypto positions, personally, I'm more into like cash position. Of course, if you're gonna take a sell position, then you can't really do cash position. You need to do a little bit on the CFD side of things, and of course, then that is also naturally leverage. But if I'm going to look into like longer term position, like over here, I'm looking to get involved in Bitcoin. If it can retrace towards the 109,500 level, I'm going to be interested to get involved in the buy. I'm not going to buy in terms of like CFD or the leverage position. I'm just going to buy into the spot position, right? And using a cash position to actually get involved in it. So the safety aspect of that obviously is that the worst case scenario is how much you actually use to buy Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes to zero, you basically lose that value. But if you're going in as a cash position, then the volatility wouldn't affect you, right? Because it can goes up, goes down. It can spike down significantly and spike back up. You basically, imagine it as holding on to a physical coin, right? Bitcoin. So that's something that just want to quickly cover on that. Of course, we are looking at some of the volatility on the currency markets as well, with dollar, with gold, of course, hitting highs again. So definitely very, very interesting movement that we're kind of looking into, and we'll talk a little bit, right, with the over the weekend movement and going into this week. What are some things that we want to take note of? Okay, so let's start off with the dollar index over here. Okay, so obviously dollar index, we can see that the market is kind of pushing higher. We did close off and clear the previous resistance zone, so we are technically in a bullish momentum. right? And right now I'm looking at the part where if we can get some sort of a decent pullback towards the area between 98.5 to 98.3. So that will be an area that we can expect some bounce for the dollar to continue to the upside, right? So we are looking at dollar strength moving forward. Obviously, we do have some position. I'll talk a little bit in a while as well, where we're looking to sell the dollar, right? But of course, those are what we call a retracement trade or quote unquote counter trend in a way, right? So we might take both positions, really depending on the horizon that we're looking at, and of course, understanding the context of those trades that we're taking. Well, hey, but dollar here, overall direction is definitely bullish bias. Okay. So of course, euro here then will be bearish bias, right? If you can get some decent corrective pullback towards the key area between 1.166 to 1.1680, that will be a good, nice little area to look for a sell. Okay, I would say the 1.1660 would be an ideal spot, right? Because that kind of confluence a little bit with where that previous kind of like bounce as well. Okay, yeah, so this is something to look up for. As I mentioned, we are also looking at the possibility of a short-term retracement trade, right? So because the expectation over here, right? So just share with you a little bit of my thought process. If we are looking at the part where the market may pull back, sometimes this pullback might opens up an opportunity where we can look for a short-term trade as well, right? The context of this is then important because you need to understand if you're going to take this, you're going against the overall momentum. The probability may be a little bit lower, but it still presents itself as an opportunity to capitalize from the market, right? So you just need to be comfortable with that. Yeah, so sometimes it's important to have the context, right? To understand, okay, this is a counter trend, this is a retracement trade. It's a little bit risky, it's a little bit less probability of working, but it's still an opportunity. Am I willing to take it? Okay, so that's a question that you obviously need to answer. You need to understand the context in order for you to make a more informed decision. Right, so euro dollar here, if we can get some sort of a maybe some sort of a liquidity sweep of this, then internally we start to see some potential setup that we can take for the market to start bouncing higher. That can be a short-term opportunity with a target at 1.16, right? Of course, this would need to have some sort of slight adjustment if you're going to be precise on it as price continue to develop. But generally, this is something that we can look out for within this week, right? So euro did not really present a setup earlier yesterday and today. The pound dollar did, but of course, this trade obviously did not work out, right? So I'm going to share with you on that as well. It actually hit our stop and I got out of this trade already. But the logic is very, very similar to the euro side, right? Because we are definitely bearish, but we are eventually still expecting some sort of a pullback before the dip, right? Because generally that's how price tends to develop. You can see over here, it comes down, it tends to pull back, it comes down, it tends to pull back. Now, obviously, we won't know for sure when the pullback is going to start. We can only base on certain clues that price leaves behind, and then we start to make a more informed decision that, okay, that's a very good chance. It might start now. And then that's where we capitalize on that, right? So that mindset, right, which I want to touch upon today as well, I think it's very, very important, right? It's more of the probabilistic mindset, right? You don't want to go into the market with what we call a certainty mindset, where you are thinking along a line where, all right, this happened and therefore the result needs to be happening as well, right? It's not like, oh, if A takes place, definitely B is going to take place as well, right? We need to go in with what we call the probabilistic mindset, where, all right, A has happened, there's a very good chance B might happen. Then you ask yourself the question, are you willing to take that risk in order for you to enjoy the potential reward, right? So it's always that balancing decision on, if you do this decision, there's a certain potential risk, but there's also a certain potential reward that you can reap from it. Okay, so I think that approach in trading is very, very important, right? So this one is just to share with you, right? We were initially expecting this. There was a setup, obviously, before this push, right? Just very, very quickly walk you through. There was this setup here that I was looking right? Where we have some early sign, right? We have the liquidity sweep here. We have the break of this high. We have that momentum push. We were expecting price to come back down and then react off it, but obviously it didn't, right? But everything was valid, right? So again, when all conditions are fulfilled, doesn't necessarily mean the trade will 100% work out, right? So you just need to accept the fact that sometimes things like that doesn't go in our favor, right? And then it's an important part that we have our risk management in place, so we can't get tagged out here. Okay, and then we just move on to the next one. But I just want to talk about this because, especially I think some of you might be joining in at the early stage, right? Or maybe still are pretty new to the whole trading journey, right? So these are part of puzzle of like mini lessons that you can really take away from it, right? I did not trade the Aussie dollar, though some of you may have taken it. I did share this opportunity as well because it's just basically very, very similar to the pound, right? You can see very, very similar. And this is where I also kind of cover about the total risk exposure, right? The importance of managing that is very, very crucial as well. Okay, so if you're not aware of what total exposure means, is essentially understanding that certain pairs or instruments are going to be correlated, and therefore if they present similar trade setups concurrently, you want to make sure that if you're going to take both, you're accounting for the fact that it's literally just one trade itself, right? Split into two ideas. So for that reason, I did not take the Aussie dollar because I'm more inclined on the pound dollar in terms of like the conditions and the criteria. To me, it's clearer on the pound, right? So this one did not work out as well, but generally euro dollar, pound dollar, and Aussie dollar, the outlook is kind of similar, right? We're breaking that low, but of course, if this kind of sweeps back up, short term, we can still look for the upside as a retracement trade within this week, right? Again, the fact is, every time price breaks a certain low or high, it tends to give us that pullback, okay? And that opens up the opportunity that we can capitalize on, right? So, yeah, that's my take on this view, right? Major pass, what we're looking out for within the week. Now, dollar Canadian, it's still breaking highs, but of course, this might potentially be a fifth wave kind of move, where I would probably not be too keen to look for the buy as we're pushing up at the top. Okay, unless price gives us a decent corrective pullback, then yeah, we might then get a buy trade setup. But for now, definitely more inclined to be expecting some sort of a pullback. Okay, so this one here, pretty much I would say aligned with the major pass as well, right? With dollar potentially pulling back first before continue its predominant trend. Okay, so do keep a lookout if we have some sort of a sell trade set up, maybe as a mini double top here on the lower time frame, right? That might open up the sell setup, maybe going into later part of this week, right? So that's on the dollar Canadian side of things. Then we have the dollar yen, right? So dollar yen here, we're expecting some sort of a pullback, right? So again, we have this huge push to the upside. We have the gap there as well. Okay, for those of you who are not aware, fundamentally, I wouldn't just say fundamental, but also perhaps a little bit on the sentiment side of things as to why the yen actually gap to the upside over the weekend, right? If you're following the fundamental development or the political development of the of Japan, right? There is a very good chance that the first female prime minister in Japan might win the next election, and her policy is basically very, very similar to Abenomics. If you're familiar with it, there's terms like last time we call it helicopter money, where basically they just, in Japan, right, they basically just print unlimited amount of money and introduce it into the economy. And of course, the supply and demand function works, where supply increase, the valuation of a certain asset would then drop, right? So in this case, If they print a lot of Japanese yen, then the supply of Japanese yen increases drastically, then obviously the value of yen would drop, right? So because of that, you can see the gaps actually happen, right? So that move itself, yes, on the chart itself is very, very clear. The momentum is to the upside. But it's actually also because of the sentiment as well as the fundamental forces that push it, right? So if you understand fundamental and sentiment aspect of the markets, it give you some clarity as to certain movement in the market as well, right? So with that said, obviously, I'm not just gonna be looking to sell the yen pair, sell the yen or buy the yen pairs just because of that particular kind of like news. Because primarily, I'm still very much focused on the charts, right? We're looking at chart patterns to kind of make a major decision. Okay, so dollar yen here, we're looking at potential sell side. Currently, to be honest, there isn't a very clear setup yet. But I would say that if we can get I mean, really depending on how strict you are in your setups, right? I mean, this year can technically be seen as some sort of a order block. We do have some sort of liquidity sweep here as well. We have this low here taken up with momentum as well. Obviously, the market is kind of pulling back. If we can get another pushback up towards this zone, yeah, we can technically consider it as a setup as well, right? So really, depending on how strict you are, because there isn't really a nice little fair gap confluence, right? If I'm gonna pull fips from the high to the low, okay, we did tag that 67, right? Would this work out eventually? Yes or no? I don't know, right? Again, no trader would know for certain. But the odds are there. Okay, the odds are there. There's a good chance this can continue to go lower, right? So that directional bias is there, right? So dollar yen is something you can keep an eye on if you're interested in it. Yeah, so that's on that. Next on is gold and silver. I think this two precious metal, essentially, we're just gonna leave it aside, right? I don't think that you're gonna get any potential setup in the near term, right? Because number one, the market has extended quite a bit. I think in terms of like trading, right? In terms of trading, I think these two instruments you probably want to be patient. It has extended quite a bit in gold, right? Obviously, you can see the trend there. If you look at silver, trend is there. I would personally want price to pull back first before taking any buy position, or even potentially as it pulls back, it might give you that indication to sell, right? Or the opportunity to trade a pullback, as I mentioned. Okay, so yeah, I would just stay out of this for now and just be patient and wait for the next pullback, right? Or at least the early sign of a pullback happening. Then only I'm gonna be focusing on that. Okay, crude oil, definitely bearish bias as of now. You can see that it's very, very clearly the market's moving lower. Again, you know, we don't want to be selling at the bottom. So pretty similar in terms of the major past expectation as well, right? This might pull back. The pullback might open up a short-term buy opportunity for us, right? But we need to definitely see that early sign of a pullback first, right? Right now, we don't really have it at the moment. Okay, so yeah, pretty similar, right? If you take a look at charts like that, kind of similar over there. So same thing, right? Short term, you can look out for the pullback. The key area here is 60.25 to 60.88, right? Which again, very nice confluence with the previous support level or previous structure low there. Okay, so that's on the crude oil side of things. S&P 500, that's where the Trump effect took place. I would say currently, it's not the clearest directional bias, but if you observe here, right, on low, but when the week opens, it opens up here, right? So it's kind of having a what we call a gap up, right? Because Friday night, the market closed at a low, but on Monday, the market opens at a high. Okay, so that is actually a gap to the upside, right? So if you kind of visualize, this is actually a V shape. Okay, so because this V shape also comes from after price taking out like swing lows of this, if this pulls back corrective over here, this can actually be referring, or it can suggest more upside, right? Because it kind of take out this liquidity and then it bounce back up, right? But right now it's a little bit early to kind of make that conclusion, because we want to definitely see some sort of a corrective pullback to increase the confirmation that this would likely go higher. Okay, so in Elliott wave terms, we would want to see 3-wave development, right? So keep it on that on the S&P side of things. If you ask me, overall on the longer term perspective going into the end of the year, I think the S&P fundamentally is still going to be bullish. Okay. Then we move into the pound yen and the odd yen, right? So this is kind of similar to dollar yen in a way. Okay, it's kind of similar in a way where you have that strong move to the upside, and right now it's doing a pullback. If you look at pound yen, kind of similar. Okay, now obviously some of this FIPS has been tagged, but again, I don't want to. It's FIPS is, I always say, it's for reference, right? It's not like a magic number. It's just really for reference point. So the price pattern or chart pattern development is always more important. It takes precedence over the FIPS. Okay. So for this here, I would say this is technically one move. If this can pulse back up here, we can expect one more, right? So that will give you that 3-wave development. And of course, what we can then also expect is, as I mentioned, short-term push up. We can potentially trade on that, right? We have taken out this low. If the market on the lower time frame gives us this push up and then start moving, something like that, we can capitalize on this move, right? But of course, if it's too small a profit potential, then we might not want to consider it. And just wait for this to, complete this cycle here, and then we'll take the sell instead, So we need to assess as price continue to develop, right? But just sharing with you what I am potentially looking for is, if this pulls back up, we can look to buy this. And once it tags this area, potentially we can look to sell it, right? And then from here, we can look to buy it, right? So we can trade in waves, right? We can trade the waves itself. Yeah, so Aussie yen is kind of similar. In a way where if this breaks here, there's a good potential that we might be able to capitalize on the short-term upside as well. Okay, but of course, again, the dollar yen, the pound yen, the odd yen, they're all correlated. So you're gonna look at one or more similar setup. Just make sure of your total risk exposure. Okay. Then we have pound Australia, right? Pound Australia over here. Currently we have this impulsive push, right, that breaks out of that crawl structure, took out that high, great, did a little bit of pullback. To be honest, I'm actually more of a neutral bias right now. We really want to see how the price is going to develop from here, right? Because there are a couple of scenarios that might play out in different pattern structure. Right now, we're seeing this as a potential liquidity sweep here, and then this might come back down and then push back up. It can also be the case where this starts to form a crawl, right? And then we'll then start to expect more downside and retest this low. There are definitely more than one possibility of how the pattern might evolve into. Okay, so at this moment, I would just be neutral and be patient, and then really wait out and see how price is going to play out first, and then as it continues to develop and leaves more clue what pattern it wants to develop before, then we'll have a better clarity in terms of like, should we focus on selling it? Should we focus on, waiting for the pullback, etc. Okay, but for now, we're just going to leave it as is. Right, then I want to talk a little bit of Bitcoin here, which I share with a couple of you as well, that I'm looking to build a position on Bitcoin for the long buy side of things, right? And more of to the long term position, right? So not really a trade position, but more of like just looking at a pretty decent opportunity to get in and then just hold it without leverage, as I mentioned, right? So my thought process on as to why I'm looking at it, right, is really I wouldn't say complex. It's pretty straightforward, right? So if I zoom out a little bit, right, maybe going on the daily time frame, okay, we have like areas of this here, okay, and obviously you can see this is a daily chart, which means this area, right, has been acting as a pretty decent kind of a support level, right? If you stretch it further, like previous was a clear resistance and the market broke through it, tap it a couple of times. Of course, I don't just trade the support and resistance and then use it as an entry, but I'm referencing this area here as a significant area where price tends to have respected it sometime. And coupled with what happened over the weekend, you can see this huge move, breaking price towards the downside, and then the market actually rejected all the way back up, right? So that recovery of a 50% back up kind of tell me that this little push here, this little move over the weekend may have liquidated a lot of positions in the Bitcoin market, right? And that logic or that perspective in my mind, right, is that, all right, majority of these people have been kind of like wiped out. Maybe the institutions are the one that's buying up all the sell positions, right? I mean, if today you need to sell, you need to kind of like exchange a position, and someone needs to then eventually still buy back up, right? So if majority of all this position has been liquidated and someone is buying, what it tells me is potentially if price were to pull back towards this zone, there might be new buyers coming in, right? Because the old buyers has all been liquidated. You can get that chain of thought, right? So I'm not saying that it's definitely going to be like bouncing from here, but it's, to me, a good opportunity to build up on the position that I would want to have on Bitcoin. Okay, now obviously it's just going to be a relatively small position as compared to the entire portfolio, because obviously crypto has its own individual risk. But I feel, again, it's a balance of, is it worth taking? To me, I'm fine with it, right? Anyway, it's a position that is not leveraged, right? So I can't share with you guys, I'm not having a stop on this position, but it's not a leverage position, right? Which means it's equivalent to like buying an actual share of a stock. Okay, so you're basically buying the actual spot coin, okay, of Bitcoin itself. So the only way to lose your entire position on that is Bitcoin goes to zero, which I doubt it will, okay? So that's the thing, okay? So my position, I've put in a buy limit at 109.550, okay? We're getting pretty close to that. If we can tap it into it, then great, I will have that position in on Bitcoin. Where I'm going to look for targets, to be honest, I'm just going to hold it, okay? Just like stock portfolio, if you get involved in a fundamentally long-term stock, you're just going to hold it without an actual take profit in mind, right? So yeah, we're going to see on that. So just want to share with you, the thought process I have in terms of like Bitcoin over here. Not really a trade per se, but it's more of like some sort of a mini portfolio that you want to put aside, right? Yeah, so that's my thought. That's my take. Good. Any questions so far up to this point? All good? Okay. Yeah, generally, if there's no questions, I guess that's my outlook for the week. We'll definitely want to keep track on some of these developments over here. Many of it is still in the early stage as of today, right? So whether we're gonna get any new opportunities within the week itself, we need to really see how price is gonna continue to develop from here. Okay. So yep, that's all from me for today. Don't see any other questions, so hopefully today's session also provide you guys some ideas and insights to prepare for the week. And as usual, I'll see you guys again in the next week's session. Okay, so see you guys. Good night.